Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ebony Man 2K, aka that Jolly Rancher, aka Pretty Ricky, what they call me, and aka the original King of Receipts. I welcome you to my channel. Today, I will answer the question, why did Just Pearly Things interview Nick Fuentes? The answer will surprise you. Now, as I mentioned in previous videos, Pearl's managers are connected to clowns on the conservative right. Her advisor, Gina Florio Bontempo, is not only Pearl's advisor, but she is also a conservative journalist on the conservative right. Now, she previously had a podcast called I'm Doing Great, and one of her frequent guests on her show was, yep, you guessed it, Nick Fuentes. I have provided an audio clip of one of her episodes with the guest Nick Fuentes with interesting topics, one being their opposition to race mixing. Now, the irony to their opposition of race mixing makes the discussion comical at best. Gina is half Korean and half Italian. Nick takes the cake. That nigga is half Irish and half Mexican. Half Mexican, y'all. How the fuck is Nick looking down on blacks when he is half Mexican and on the low end of the social ladder? Man, you cannot make this shit up. It is obvious that a lot of these racist talking points have origins in self-hate, and they are trickling down to a young and gullible Pearl through her handlers. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, let me show you my receipts to back my claim. In this presentation, I will first let you listen to a short clip of the interview by Pearl's manager, Gina Bontempo, on her podcast last year. In this interview, Gina and Nick expressed their disdain for mixed races. Now, oddly enough, Gina is half white and half Korean. Nick is half white and half Mexican. The hypocrisy of this stance by the two is utterly ridiculous. Now, what I highly suspect that when they say that they are against mixed race, what they really mean is that they are against mixed race with blacks. After the first clip, I will then play a second clip from a live panel that was conducted by the Manosphere YouTuber Obsidian. Now, Obsidian's special guest on this panel was Nick Fuentes, discussing matters of race in the United States. In this discussion, Nick suggested that post-slavery, blacks in America were on equal footing with whites. Now, one of the guests on the panel, YouTuber Mike TV, confronted Nick and asked what time in history does he suggest that this equal footing actually happened. Y'all, listen. Do you know replied that this happened around the 70s and 80s, around the same time Michael Jackson came out with Thriller? Are you fucking serious? Are you fucking serious, yo? Nick's assertion that white society's acceptance of Michael Jackson was proof that the races were then on equal footing, y'all. You cannot make this shit up, yo. Look, man, listening to this guy in different settings, it is obvious that Nick Fuentes is a bird brain, yo. He's a bird brain. For one, Nick is only 24 years old and has not had enough life experiences to put his thoughts in proper context and perspective. This Michael Jackson comment in regards to race balance in America is a perfect example of how he still is too young and immature to even process history correctly. Hannah Pearl Davis, who is 26, and Nick Fuentes, who is 24, are basically one and the same in my opinion. Now listen, I'm not going to say that they are both stupid, but I will say that they are both ignorant, which is being more than kind on my part. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Ebony Man 2K, the original king of receipts. Let's get it.
There's another thing I wanted to ask you about, which we've talked about on the show before, interracial marriage.
A lot of people were asking about this.
All three of us are technically products of interracial marriages.
All three of us who? Nick?
Yeah, because your dad is...
Well, he's half Mexican.
He's half Mexican, so not as much.
That's where the Fuentes come from.
Yeah.
Sure,
but I think this is a really interesting topic. Our audience likes to hear about it. One of our first episodes, Mike and I kind of got into it and just talked about, like, you know, what are the effects of interracial marriage. And so I heard you talk about it a little bit in your interview with Milo, but I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, you know, this is like my most controversial take. And everyone's always asking me. And, you know, I'm not a hater about it. And I'll say this. I don't think it's morally wrong necessarily. But, you know, I'm just old fashioned in a certain sense. Like, I tell people, like, I want a white kid. I'm white. I have green eyes. I have light skin. I have, you know, wavy brown hair. I want my kid to look like me. You know, I don't want to have a black kid. It's not because I don't have, you know.
Super bigoted. Imagine preferences are bigoted now. So, okay, so to interject, are you familiar with Dr. Umar Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, obviously, like Killer Mike, and they talk about this. They say they think blacks should date and marry within their own race. And obviously, I don't even think that that's a controversial idea, because it makes sense just as far as ideals, you know, background, culture, even, you know, to boil it down to the lowest point and say, like, well, there are food differences and stuff like that. But it would make sense that maybe less problems would arise from a couple who is, you know, either. But even then, I don't know. Yeah, no, I don't know how I feel about this. I'm really interested to hear how you feel about this.
Last time, I'll interject before you go on too, is that you can't deny that it is objectively more difficult to have an interracial marriage. My parents are a great example. It was very difficult. My dad's born and raised in America, but he comes from an Italian family in New York, and he met my mom in South Korea, and it was a huge adjustment period to get married there and to bring my mom to New York and move in with his American family. And it was a not only to say a culture shock, but it was a really big strain on their marriage in the first few years that they were together. And, you know, they weathered the storm and they're still together and they believe they're soulmates. But you cannot deny, and they of course admit this too, that it is so much harder to maintain a strong marriage and to go down the path of having a strong nuclear family when you have people from completely different worlds. So I can kind of understand what you're saying, but keep going with what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I was telling this to Louis Theroux. I'm surprised because I did the Louis Theroux documentary, and we talked about this for a long time. And, you know, ultimately, the thing is, like, I could give you a lot of reasons why it's a bad idea, like, oh, well, the higher likelihood of mental illness for the children, higher rates of domestic violence, and higher rates of divorce, and so on. But that would be a rationalization. I just think people should stick with their own. I just think that I love my identity, and I want my kids to participate in that. You know, because I come from, you know, I identify with the Italian side of my family, and I want an Italian family. You know, I mean, yeah, I'm Irish and Mexican, and it doesn't need to be, you know, people always use that to say, oh, well, your last name's Fuentes. It doesn't need to be more complicated than it is. I think people generally understand what it means, you know. And by the way, like, every other race is able to do this. You always have the stereotypical, you know, black people like, hey, I want you to marry a black girl, and Asian people, you know, you marry a nice Chinese, you know, whatever.
Literally, yeah.
Right?
My mom always told me she said, marry your own kind. And I was like, what kind do I have? It's not like I'm full Korean. I'm half Korean, half Italian. But my husband is half Italian, half Japanese.
Wait, have you ever pushed back against your mom, though?
When I was younger, yeah, when I was a young idiot liberal, I cried once because she told me, she flat out said that sorry, Mom, she's like, kind of said, if you can help it, don't marry a black guy. It's the same thing that what you just said, not because they're black, but because she's like, it would be so much harder for your child to be a mixed race and feel like they don't belong. And she was like, plus you want to marry your own kind and have a kid who looks like you. And so I totally get what you're saying. That's why I laughed when he said, I want my own kind. Like, my mom used to joke. Not joke. She used to say that to me, and then I would jokingly get upset at her, but I get what you're saying.
From an aesthetic point of view.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in Korean culture, my mom says that when a couple looks like they could be related, it's actually, they see that as a good thing. They see that it's probably going to be a strong marriage and they're going to have a really strong family. And people, I mean, they think that they're being mean online, like, well, you and your husband look like you're related. I'm like, thank you, because that means that we're meant to be
together. Same with
together.
me and my wife. Yeah, my wife's red hair too.
Yeah, you guys too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we have an adorable daughter.
We do too.
Kind of looks the way I imagined my child to look.
Same.
So.
Yeah, she does look like a...
Hey, J9. Vicky says, when Michael Jackson dropped Thriller is when we became equal. Hey. You wouldn't believe it, but that's exactly what Nick's about to say. Yes. Watch this shit. Watch.
He became truly equal and fully equal with whites. That is when they began to express themselves in novel ways, and the music changed. Soul versus rock or disco.
What year do you believe we became equal with whites?
Well, some say it's Civil Rights Act, or others would say, well, racism persisted maybe a decade beyond that. I would say safely maybe 70s or 80s is when everybody felt.
So he thinks that black people became equal to whites in the 70s or the 80s. This nigga don't know about COINTELPRO. He don't know about the war on drugs. He don't know about the Clintons and the three strikes policy. He don't know about the redlining that still goes on to this day. He thinks in the 70s or the 80s we became equal with white people, but it's gonna get worse. It's gonna get a whole lot worse, and it's not gonna get better.
Or others would say, well, racism persisted maybe a decade beyond that. I would say safely maybe 70s or 80s is when everybody felt equal.
How can you say the 70s or the 80s is when we felt equal, when we had things such as the war on drugs? We literally had our government pumping drugs into our community to destabilize our families and fund the war in the Contra. We had something called COINTELPRO, where our own government dismantled our political organizations, and I believe the American government is on record as being responsible for Martin Luther King's assassination. So when you say in the 70s or the 80s we were free and felt free, I'm just wondering what your source is on that.
Well, you're talking about the government.
Oh my God, the whole thing is the government.
What are your sources? What are your sources? Well, you're talking about the government.
It's the government. It's the government. The government. The government. The government. It's the government. It's the government. The government. The government. It's the government. It's the government. It's the government. The government. The government. The government. It's the government. It's the government. The government. The government. It's the government. It's the government. It's the government. The government.
Let's get into it, y'all. Let's see what Nick says. And all I do is ask some very simple questions, and I'm gonna get kicked off for this.
What your source is on that?
Well, you're talking about the government. People love Michael Jackson in the 80s, and the government killed white people too. The government killed JFK.
Wait, so because people loved Michael Jackson in the 80s, we weren't under oppression in the 80s?
Yeah.
In the 80s, man. And then he said, yes, yeah. Did y'all just hear what this man said? I said, what about COINTELPRO? What about the redlining? What about the war on drugs? What about assassinating our leaders? And he's going to say, what?
The government killed white people too. The government killed JFK.
Wait, so because people loved Michael and felt free, I'm just wondering what your source is on that.
Well, you're talking about the government. People love Michael Jackson in the 80s, and the government killed white people too. The government.
People loved Michael Jackson in the 80s, and the government killed white people too. That's his rebuttal to me. Nick says that we became free in the 70s or the 80s. I remind him of COINTELPRO, the war on drugs, redlining, and his response is, white people loved Michael Jackson in the 80s, and the government killed white people too. What the fuck?
Killed JFK.
When you say in the 70s or the 80s we were free and felt free, I'm just wondering what your source is on that.
Well, you're talking about the government. People love Michael Jackson in the 80s, and the government killed white people too. The government killed JFK.
Wait, so because people loved Michael Jackson in the 80s, we weren't under oppression in the 80s?
Yeah.
And he says yes twice. So because people loved Michael Jackson in the 80s, we weren't oppressed? Yes. Yeah. All right.
You know what I'm saying, though?
That's a completely asinine statement, Nick. To equate the success of one singer to the success of a whole that's extremely ignorant.
That's not what he said.
Michael Jackson, that's exactly why would he bring up Michael Jackson in the same breath? Why would Michael Jackson even be brought up?
Agreed.
Jackson couldn't even been on
You're talking about two different things. You're talking about two different things. You had... Okay.
No, Nick can't take the smoke. Nick can't take one simple juvenile. I mean, it wasn't juvenile, but it was so like, come on, I wasn't trying to get at him. I wasn't trying to mind fuck him. It was a very simple, basic question. Yeah. And he folded.
And let me ask you a question. Of your solutions, Nick, of your solutions, what of your prospectively shallow perspective? Incredibly shallow, because you're showing your age.
That's Aaron.
It seems that.
And that was going to be my next question. I really wanted to know his age.
From another person that has a different.
I already asked a super chat online.
Okay, so what of the?
And yes, Obsidian's coon-ass brought Jessica X up too. All the self-hating black people got invited to the cookout, and he only kicked off the people that were on the other side of Nick, the people that opposed his rhetoric. Come on, make him.
Very shallow perspective. Do you see a metric of that actually works? Tell us one thing, sir, that you can find that actually works in your perspective anywhere on the planet. Because,
okay, I'll tell you.
He's not trying to save us, bro. I don't understand why you even asked.
No, I'm talking about what his actual solution. It doesn't matter about us. I want to hear what his solution is because he's dancing around it.
He's not looking for a solution.
Let him respond, sir. Let him respond.
Yeah, my solution is we need to shut down all immigration so that we can stabilize America. If you look...
Classic CNN, Fox News talking about... This man don't have an original bone in his body.
The research on this...
Wait, go back. You assume that it stabilizes, but that's not a point. Saying it isn't a point.
Let him finish.
Come in one at a time, please. And you say, I'm shallow and all this. And then with this question... Now the interruption. So, okay, yeah, that's. I know you're a liberal. That's really interesting.
Hold on a second. Aaron, I need you to be cool. You ask the man a question. Give the man a chance to respond. Nick,
here Obsidian comes protecting his white zaddy. Hey, Aaron, I know you're a fellow white man, but I need you to be cool on Nick because Nick is the chief white man in charge here on this panel.
Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you. So. If you look around the world, there was a study that was done, it was published in the Atlantic years ago, and there's the Atlantic, liberal paper, but they begrudgingly admit that when you look at countries, the more ethnic diversity they have, the more unstable they are, the more unstable their government is. The more ethnically diverse, the more unstable it is. The country needs to restrict immigration, and the reason why is because the people we're bringing in are different. They have fundamentally different views about religion, about culture, and in many cases they don't even speak the same language. When you're putting these people into cities and you're putting them into situations where they're going to interact with the native population frequently.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we live in the Twilight Zone. We have Hispanic neo-Nazi white supremacists. We have first-generation immigrants that are anti-immigration.
Are you fucking serious? Are you fucking serious, yo? Nick's assertion that white society's acceptance of Michael Jackson was proof that the races were then on equal footing, y'all. You cannot make this shit up, yo. Look, man, listening to this guy in different settings, it is obvious that Nick Fuentes is a bird brain, yo. He's a bird brain. For one, Nick is only 24 years old and has not had enough life experiences to put his thoughts in proper context and perspective. This Michael Jackson comment in regards to race balance in America is a perfect example of how he still is too young and immature to even process history correctly. Hannah Pearl Davis, who is 26, and Nick Fuentes, who is 24, are basically one and the same in my opinion. Now listen, I'm not going to say that they are both stupid, but I will say that they are both ignorant, which is being more than kind on my part. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Ebony Man 2K, the original king of receipts.